Part II of The Medicine Men of the Apache by John Gregory Bourke. This recording is in the public domain. Part II. Medicine Women. There are medicine women as well as medicine men among the Apache, with two of whom I was personally acquainted. One, named Captain Jack, was well advanced in years and physically quite feeble, but bright in intellect, and said to be well versed in the lore of her people. She was fond of instructing her grandchildren, whom she supported, in the prayers and invocations to the gods worshipped by her fathers, and I have several times listened carefully and unobserved to these recitations, and determined that the prayers were the same as those which had already been given to myself as those of the tribe. The other was named Zigozuni, a Chiricahua, and a woman with a most romantic history. She had passed 5 years in captivity among the Mexicans in Sonora, and had learned to speak Spanish with facility. A mountain lion had severely mangled her in the shoulder and knee, and once she had been struck by lightning, so that whether by reason of superior attainments, or by an appeal to the superstitious reverence of her comrades, she wielded considerable influence. These medicine women devote their attention principally to obstetrics, and have many peculiar stories to relate concerning prenatal influences and matters of that sort. Zigozuni wore at her neck the stone amulet, shaped like a spear, which is figured in the illustration of this paper. The material was the silex from the top of a mountain, taken from a ledge at the foot of a tree which had been struck by lightning. The fact that siliceous rock will emit sparks when struck by another hard body appeals to the reasoning powers of the savage as a proof that the fire must have been originally deposited therein by the bolt of lightning. A tiny piece of this arrow or lance was broken off and ground into the finest powder, and then administered in water to women during time of gestation. I have found the same kind of arrows in use among the women of Laguna and other pueblos. This matter will receive more extended treatment in my coming monograph on stone worship. Mendieta is authority for the statement that the Mexicans had both medicine men and medicine women. The former attended to the sick men, and the latter to the sick women. A las mujeres siempre les corruban otras mujeres, y a los hombres otros hombres. Some of the medicine women seem to have made an illicit use of the knowledge they had acquired, in which case both the medicine women and the woman concerned were put to death. La mujer preñada que tomaba con que abortar y echar la criatura, ella y la física que le había dado con que la lanzas, ambas morían. Gomara asserts that they were to be found among the Indians of Chicora, South Carolina. He calls them viejas, old women. Los médicos eran mujeres viejas y no había otras. En Nicaragua, las viejas curaban los enfermos. There were medicine women in Huazacalo. Tiene médicos para curar las enfermedades. A los más eran mujeres grandes herbolarias que hacían todas las curas con hierbas. Bernal Diaz, in 1568, speaks of having, on a certain occasion, at the summit of a high mountain, found an Indian woman, very fat, and having with her a dog of that species which they breed in order to eat, and which do not bark. This Indian was a witch. She was in the act of sacrificing the dog, which is a signal of hostility. The office of medicine man, though generally usurped by males, does not appertain to them exclusively, and at the time of our visit the one most extensively known was a black or mestiza woman, who had acquired the most unbounded influence by shrewdness joined to a hideous personal appearance and a certain mystery with which she was invested. Creeks have medicine women as well as medicine men. The Eskimo have medicine men and medicine women. The medicine men and women of the Dakota can cause ghosts to appear on occasion. Speaking of the Chippewa, Spencer says, "Women may practice soothsaying, but the higher religious functions are performed only by men." The medicine men of the Apache do not assume to live upon food different from that used by the laity. There are such things as sacred feasts among the tribes of North America, as, for example, the feast of stewed puppy at the sun dance of the Sioux, but in these all people share. In the mortuary ceremonies of the medicine men there is a difference of degree, but not of kind. The Mojave, however, believe that the medicine men go to a heaven of their own. They also believe vaguely in 4 different lives after this one. Cabeza de Vaca says that the Floridians buried their ordinary dead, but burned their medicine men, whose incinerated bones they preserved and drank in water. After they, the medicine men and women of the Dakota, have 4 times run their career in human shape, they are annihilated. Schultz says that the medicine men of the Sioux, and the medicine women also, after death may be transformed into wild beasts. Surgeon Smart shows that, among other offices entrusted to the medicine men of the Apache, was the reception of distinguished strangers. Long asserts that the medicine men of the Oto, Omaha, and others along the Missouri pretended to be able to converse with the fetus in utero and predict the sex. Nothing of that kind has ever come under my notice. Adair says that the medicine men of the Cherokee would not allow snakes to be killed. The Apache will not let snakes be killed within the limits of the camp by one of their own people, but they will not only allow a stranger to kill them, but request him to do so. They made this request of me on 3 occasions. Several of the most influential medicine men whom I have known were blind. Among others, old Na Ta Do Tash, whose medicine hat figures in these pages. Whether this blindness was the result of old age, or due to the frenzy of dancing until exhausted in all seasons, I am unable to conjecture. Schultz says that of the shamans of Siberia, this artificial frenzy has such a serious effect upon the body, and more particularly the eyes, that many of the shamans become blind, a circumstance which enhances the esteem in which they are held. Some of the medicine men of Peru went blind from overexertion in their dances, although Gomara assigns as a reason that it was from fear of the demon with whom they talked. Y en aguano se abran los ojos para semejante hablar, i.e. talk with the devil, y creo que lo hacían de medio, porque todos ellos se ataban los ojos cuando hablan con él. Dunbar tells us that the medicine men of the Pawnee swallowed arrows and knives, and had also the trick of apparently killing a man and bringing him back to life. The same power was claimed by the medicine men of the Zuni, and the story told me by old Pedro Pino of the young men whom they used to kill and restore to life will be found in The Snake Dance of the Moqui. Remedies and modes of treatment. The materia medica of the Apache is at best limited, and comprehends scarcely anything more than roots, leaves, and other vegetable matter. In gathering these remedies they resort to no superstitious ceremonies that I have been able to detect, although I have not often seen them collecting. They prefer incantation to pharmacy at all times, although the squaws of the Wallapai, living near Old Camp Beale Springs in 1873, were extremely fond of castor oil, for which they would beg each day. The main reliance for nearly all disorders is the sweat bath, which is generally conducive of sound repose. All Indians know the benefit to be derived from relieving an overloaded stomach, and resort to the titillation of the fauces with a feather to induce nausea. I have seen the Zuni take great draughts of lukewarm water, and then practice the above as a remedy in dyspepsia. When a pain has become localized and deep-seated, the medicine men resort to suction of the part affected, and raise blisters in that way. I was once asked by the Hualapai chief Sequania to look at his back and sides. He was covered with cicatrices due to such treatment, the medicine men thinking thus to alleviate the progressive paralysis from which he had been long a sufferer, and from which he shortly afterwards died. After a long march, I have seen Indians of different bands expose the small of the back uncovered to the fierce heat of a pile of embers to produce a rubefacient effect and stimulate what is known as a weak back. They drink freely of hot teas or infusions of herbs and grasses for the cure of chills. They are all dexterous in the manufacture of splints out of willow twigs, and seem to meet with much success in their treatment of gunshot wounds, which they do not dress as often as white practitioners, alleging that the latter, by so frequently removing the bandages, unduly irritate the wounds. I have known them to apply moxa, and I remember to have seen 2 deep scars upon the left hand of the great Apache chief Cochise due to this cause. It should not be forgotten that the world owes a great debt to the medicine men of America, who first discovered the virtues of coca, sarsaparilla, jalap, cinchona, and guaiacum. They understand the administration of enemata, and have an apparatus made of the paunch of a sheep and the hollow leg bone. Scarification is quite common, and is used for a singular purpose. The Apache scouts, when tired, were in the habit of sitting down and lashing their legs with bunches of nettles until the blood flowed. This, according to their belief, relieved the exhaustion. The medicine men of the Floridians, according to Vaca, sucked and blew on the patient, and put hot stones on his abdomen to take away pain. They also scarified, and they seem to have used moxas. Ils caudraient aussi avec le feu. The medicine men of Hispaniola cured by suction, and when they had extracted a stone or other alleged cause of sickness, it was preserved as a sacred relic, especially by the women, who looked upon it as of great aid in parturition. Venias speaks of a tube called the shahuaco, formed out of a very hard black stone, used by the medicine men of California in sucking such parts of the patient's body as were grievously afflicted with pains. In these tubes they sometimes placed lighted tobacco, and blew down upon the part affected after the manner of a moxa, I suppose. The men of Panuco were so addicted to drunkenness that we are told, lorsqu'ils sont fatigués de boire le vin par la bouche, ils se couchent, élevant les jambes en l'air, et s'en font introduire dans le fondement au moyen d'une canule, tant que le corps peut en contenir. The administration of wine in this manner may have been as a medicine, and the Aztecs of Panuco may have known that nutriment could be assimilated in this way. It shows at least that the Aztecs were acquainted with enemata. Note: here follows an extended Spanish text. End note. Smith says that the medicine men of the Araucanians are well acquainted with the proper use of emetics, cathartics, and sudorifics. For the purpose of injection they make use of a bladder, as is still commonly practised among the Chilenos. Oviedo says of the medicine men, "Conocían muchas hierbas de que usaban y eran oportunas a diversas enfermedades." One of the most curious remedies presented in Bancroft's first volume is the use of a poultice of mashed poison ivy leaves as a remedy for ringworm by the Indians of Lower California. The Indians of Tupia, in the Sierra Madre near Sinaloa, were in the habit of scarifying their tired legs and aching temples. The Arawaks of Guiana also scarified, according to Spencer. The inhabitants of Kamchatka use enemata much in the same way as the Navajo and Apache do. They also use moxa made of a fungus. It has never been my good fortune to notice an example of trephining among our savage tribes, although I have seen a good many wounded, some of them in the head. Trephining has been practiced by the aborigines of America, and the whole subject, as noted among the primitive peoples of all parts of the globe, has been treated in a monograph by Dr. Robert Fletcher, U.S. Army. Dr. Fordyce Grinnell, who was for some years attached to the Wichita Agency as resident physician, has published the results of his observations in a monograph entitled "The Healing Art as Practiced by the Indians of the Plains," in which he says, "Wet cupping is resorted to quite frequently. The surface is scarified by a sharp stone or knife, and a buffalo horn is used as the cupping glass. Cauterizing with red-hot irons is not infrequently employed." A cautery of burning pith was used by the Araucanians. It may be safely affirmed that a majority of the nation (Choctaw) prefer to receive the attentions of a white physician when one can be obtained. When the doctor is called to his patient, he commences operations by excluding all white men and all who disbelieve in the efficacy of his incantations. The Apache scouts seem to prefer their own medicine men when seriously ill, and believe the weird singing and praying around the couch is more effective than the medicine dealt out by our camp sawbones. The promptness with which the American Indian recovers from severe wounds has been commented upon by many authorities. From my personal observation, I could, were it necessary, adduce many examples. The natives of Australia seem to be endowed with the same recuperative powers. After all other means have failed, the medicine men of the Southwest devote themselves to making altars in the sand and clay near the couch of the dying, because, as Antonio Bezias explained, this act was all the same as extreme unction. They portray the figures of various animals, and then take a pinch of the dust or ashes from each one, and rub upon the person of the sick man as well as upon themselves. Similar altars or tracings were made by the medicine men of Guatemala, when they were casting the horoscope of a child, and seeking to determine what was to be its medicine in life. This matter of sand altars has been fully treated by Matthews in the report of the Bureau of Ethnology for 1883-84. And there are several representations to be found in my snake dance of the Moquis. Writing on sand is a mode of divination among the Chinese. Padre Boscana represents the Puplum, or medicine men of the Indians of California, as making or sketching a most uncouth and ridiculous figure of an animal on the ground, and presumably of sands, clays, and other materials. Hair and wigs. The medicine men of the Apache were, at least while young, extremely careful of their hair, and I have often seen those who were very properly proud of their long and glossy chevelure. Particularly do I recall to mind the doctor at San Carlos in 1885, who would never allow his flowing black tresses to be touched. But they do not roach their hair, as I have seen the Pawnee do. They do not add false hair to their own, as I have seen among the Crow of Montana and the Mojave of the Rio Colorado. They do not apply plasters of mud, as do their neighbors the Yuma, Cocopa, Mojave, and Pima, and in such a manner as to convince spectators that the intent was ceremonial. And they do not use wigs in their dances. Wigs made of black wool may still be found occasionally among the Pueblos, but the Apache do not use them, and there is no reference to such a thing in their myths. It is to be understood that these paragraphs are not treating upon the superstitions concerning the human hair as such, but simply of the employment of wigs, which would seem, in former days, among some of the tribes of the Southwest to have been made of human hair presented by patients who had recovered from sickness, or by mourners whose relatives had died. Wigs with masks attached were worn by the Costa Ricans, according to Gabb. Some of the Apache Yuma men wear long rolls of matted hair behind, which are the thickness of a finger and 2 feet or more in length, and composed of old hair mixed with that growing on the head, or are in the form of a wig made of hair that has been cut off when mourning the dead, to be worn on occasions of ceremony. Observations of the same kind have been made by Speke upon the customs of the people of Africa in his Nile, concerning the Kiti people at the head of the Nile; by Cook in Hawkesworth's Voyages, speaking of Tahiti, and by Barcia, speaking of Greenland. Sir Samuel Baker describes the peculiar wigs worn by the tribes on Lake Albert Nyanza, formed of the owner's hair and contributions from all sources plastered with clay into a stiff mass. Melchior Diaz reported that the people of Cibola élevaient dans leurs maisons des animaux velus, grands comme des chiens d'Espagne. Ils les tendaient, ils en font des perroquets de couleurs. This report was sent by the Viceroy Mendoza to the Emperor Charles V. Exactly what these domesticated animals were, it would be hard to say. They may possibly have been Rocky Mountain sheep, though Mr. Cushing, who has studied the question somewhat extensively, is of the opinion that they may have been a variety of the llama. The Assiniboine used to wear false hair, and also had the custom of dividing their hair into joints of an inch or more, marked by a sort of paste of red earth and glue. The Mandans did the same. In this they both resemble the Mojave of the Rio Colorado. The Algonquins believe also in a malignant Manitou. She wore a robe made of the hair of her victims, for she was the cause of death. The Apache, until within the last 20 years, plucked out the eyelashes and often the eyebrows, but only a few of them still persist in the practice. Kane says that the Winnebagoes have the custom of pulling out their eyebrows. Herrera says that among the signs by which the Lascastes recognized their gods when they saw them in visions were vieneseñas a sin pestañas. Mudheads. Reference has been made to a ceremonial plastering of mud upon the heads of Indians. When General Crook was returning from his expedition into the Sierra Madre, Mexico, in 1883, in which expedition a few of the enemy had been killed, the scouts, upon reaching the San Bernardino River, made a free use of the sweat bath, with much singing and other formulas, the whole being part of the lustration which all warriors must undergo as soon as possible after being engaged in battle. The Apache proper did not apply mud to their heads, but the Apache Yuma did. Captain Grossman, U.S. Army, says of the Pima method of purification after killing an Apache that the isolation of the warrior lasts for 16 days, during which period no one speaks to him, not even the old woman who brings him his food. The first day he touches neither food nor drink, and he eats sparingly for the whole time, touching neither meat nor salt. He bathes frequently in the Gila River, and nearly the whole time keeps his head covered with a plaster of mud and mesquite. The boys of the Massacqueras of 7 or 8 years wear clay fastened on the hair of the head, and still renewed with new clay, weighing sometimes 5 or 6 pounds, nor may they be free thereof till a war or lawful fight he hath killed a man. According to Padre Geronimo Boscana, the traditions of the Indians of California show that they fed upon a kind of clay, but this clay was often plastered upon their heads as a kind of ornament. These were the Indians of San Juan Capistrano, who strongly resemble the Mojave. After all, the mudheads of the Mojave are no worse than those people in India who still bedaub their heads with the holy mud of the Ganges. Up to this time the mud has been the blue mud of the Colorado and other rivers, but when we find Herbert Spencer mentioning that the heads of the Comanche are besmeared with a dull red clay, we may suspect that we have stumbled upon an analogue of the custom of the Aztec priests, who bedaubed their heads with the coagulating life blood of their human victims. We know that there has been such a substitution practice among the Indians of the Pueblo of Jemez, who apply red ochre to the mouth of the stone mountain lion, in whose honor human blood was once freely shed. The practice of so many of the Plains tribes of painting the median line of the head with vermilion seems to be traceable back to a similar custom. Scalp shirts. The shirt depicted in Plate 3, made of buckskin and trimmed with human scalps, would seem to belong to the same category with the mantles made of votive hair, mentioned as being in use among the California tribe a little more than a century ago. It was presented to me by Little Big Man, who led me to believe that it had once belonged to the great chief of the Sioux, Crazy Horse, or had at least been worn by him. Of its symbolism I am unable to find the explanation. The colors yellow and blue would seem to represent the earth and water or sky, the feathers attached would refer to the birds, and the round circle on the breast is undoubtedly the sun. There is a cocoon affixed to one shoulder, the significance of which I do not know. The rhombus, or bull roarer. The rhombus was first seen by me at the snake dance of the Tusayan, in the village of Walpi, Arizona, in the month of August, 1881. Previous to that date I had heard of it vaguely, but had never been able to see it in actual use. The medicine men twirled it rapidly and with a uniform motion about the head and from front to rear, and succeeded in faithfully imitating the sound of a gust of rain-laden wind. As explained to me by one of the medicine men, by making this sound they compel the wind and rain to come to the aid of the crops. At a later date I found it in use among the Apache, and for the same purpose. The season near the San Carlos Agency during the year 1884 had been unusually dry, and the crops were parched. The medicine men arranged a procession, two of the features of which were the rhombus and a long-handled cross, upon which various figures were depicted. Of the latter I will speak at another time. Again, while examining certain ruins in the Verde Valley, in central Arizona, I found that the cliff dwellers, as it has become customary to call the prehistoric inhabitants, had employed the same weapon of persuasion in their intercourse with their gods. I found the rhombus also among the Rio Grande Pueblo tribes and the Zuni. Dr. Washington Matthews has described it as existing among the Navajo, and Major J. W. Powell has observed it in use among the Utes of Nevada and Utah. As will be shown, its use in all the parts of the world seemed to have been as general as that of any sacred implement known to primitive man, not even excepting the sacred cords or rosaries discussed in this paper. 3 forms of the rhombus have come under my own observation, each and all apparently connected in symbolism with the lightning. The first terminates in a triangular point, and the general shape is either that of a long, narrow parallelogram capped with an equilateral triangle, or else the whole figure is that of a slender isosceles triangle. Where the former shape was used, as at the Tusayan snake dance, the tracing of a snake or lightning in blue or yellow followed down the length of the rhombus and terminated in the small triangle, which did duty as the snake's head. The second pattern was found by Dr. Matthews among the Navajo, and by myself in the old cliff dwellings. The one which I found was somewhat decayed, and the extremity of the triangle was broken off. There was no vestige of painting left. The second form was serrated on both edges to simulate the form of the snake or lightning. The third form, in use among the Apache, is an oblong of 7 or 8 inches in length, 1 1/4 inches in width by 1/4 in thickness. One extremity, that through which the cord passes, is rounded to rudely represent a human head, and the whole bears a close resemblance to the drawings of schoolboys which are intended for the human figure. The Apache explained that the lines on the front side of the rhombus were the entrails, and those on the rear side the hair of their wind god. The hair is of several colors, and represents the lightning. I did not ascertain positively that such was the case, but was led to believe that the rhombus of the Apache was made by the medicine men from wood, generally pine or fir, which had been struck by lightning on the mountain tops. Such wood is held in the highest estimation among them, and is used for the manufacture of amulets of especial efficacy. The Apache name for the rhombus is Tsi-Ditindi, the sounding wood. The identification of the rhombus or bull roarer of the ancient Greeks with that used by the Tusayan in their snake dance was first made by E.B. Tylor in the Saturday Review in a criticism upon the snake dance of the Moquis of Arizona. The Kaffirs have the rhombus among their playthings. The nidiwu is a piece of wood about 6 or 8 inches long, and 1 1/2 or 2 inches wide, and 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch thick in the middle. Towards the edges it is beveled off, so that the surface is convex, or consists of 2 inclined planes. At one end it has a thong attached to it, by which it is whirled rapidly around. There is a kind of superstition connected with the nodiwu, that playing with it invites a gale of wind. Men will, on this account, often prevent boys from using it when they desire calm weather for any purpose. This superstition is identical with that which prevents many sailors from whistling at sea. Of the Peruvians we are informed that their belief was that there was a man in the sky with a sling and a stick, and that in his power were the rain, the hail, the thunder, and all else that appertains to the regions of the air where clouds are formed. The sacred twirler of the snake dance is found in Greece, America, Africa, and New Zealand. It survives as a toy in England and the United States. The same peculiar instrument has been noticed in the religious ceremonials of the Australians, especially in the initiatory rites of the Bora. It is called the tiricote. The twirling of the Tsi-Ditini in medicine or prayer corresponds to the revolution of the prayer wheel of the lamas. The Cross. The sign of the cross appears in many places in Apache symbolism. The general subject of the connection of the cross with the religion of the aborigines of the American continent has been so fully traversed by previous authors that I do not care to add much more to the subject beyond saying that my own observation has assured me that it is related to the cardinal points and the 4 winds, and is painted by warriors upon their moccasins upon going into a strange district in the hope of keeping them from getting on a wrong trail. In October, 1884, I saw a procession of Apache men and women, led by the medicine men, bearing 2 crosses made as follows. The vertical arm was 4 feet 10 inches long, and the transverse between 10 and 12 inches, and each was made of slats about 1 1/2 inches wide, which looked as if they had been long in use. They were decorated with blue polka dots upon the unpainted surface. A blue snake meandered down the longer arm. There was a circle of small willow twigs at top, next below that a small zinc-cased mirror, a bell, and eagle feathers. Nossi, the Apache whom I induced to bring it to me after the ceremony, said that they carried it in honor of Gusanufti, to induce her to send rain, at that time much needed for their crops. It is quite likely that this particular case represents a composite idea, that the original beliefs of the Apache have been modified to some extent by the crude ideas of the Mexican captives among them, who still remember much that was taught them in the churches of the hamlets in northern Mexico, from which they were kidnapped years ago. But, on the other hand, it is to be remembered that the cross has always formed a part of the Apache symbolism, that the snake does not belong to the Christian faith, and that it has never been allowed to appear upon the cross since the time of the Gnostics in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Therefore we must regard that as a pagan symbol, and so must we regard the circle of willow twigs, which is exactly the same as the circle we have seen attached to the sacred cords for the cure of headache. The cross was found in full vogue as a religious emblem among the aborigines all over America. Father Leclerc speaks of its very general employment by the Gaspésiens. Ils ont parmi eux tous infidèles qu'ils soignent la croix, en singulière vénération qu'ils la portent, figurée sur leur habit et sur leur chair, qu'ils la tiennent à la main dans tout leur voyage, soit per mer, soit per terre, et qu'enfin ils la portent au dehors et au dedans de leurs cabanas, comme la marque d'un eux qui les distinguait des autres nations du Canada. He narrates that the Gaspé tradition or myth was, that the whole tribe being ravaged by a plague, the medicine men had recourse to the sun, who ordered them to make use of the cross in every extremity. Herrera relates that the followers of Hernandez de Cordoba found at Cape Cartouche unos adoratorios y cruces pintadas que les causó gran admiración. He also says that Juan de Grijalva, on the island of Cozumel, found a number of oratories and temples, but one in particular was made in the form of a square tower with 4 openings. Inside this tower was a cross made of lime, which the natives reverenced as the god of the rain. Una cruz de cal de 3 varas en alto, a la cal tenían por el dios de la lluvia. End of Part 2.